Hey, what's going on with shipping? Sal Mercaglano here. So I want to talk a little bit about the choices that Newark Fire Department had to make in fighting that fire on board the vessel. So I'm going to use my fire truck for the background here as we go through it. So one of the hoses that they wound up using on board the ships were 1-inch hoses. And on fire trucks, 1-inch hoses are basically reel lines or trash, what they call trash lines. Very small diameter. Only get maybe about 60 gallons per minute out of those hoses. Not a lot of water for suppression, not a lot of penetration. The preferred hoses we like to use are these. These are 1 3/4 hoses. These are the main attack lines off most engines. Now my engine's gonna be a little different than what Newark had. We're a rural fire department, so I carry a lot more water, about 1,000 gallons. A city fire department, probably about 500 gallons because they hook into hydrants. But these 1 3/4 lines can flow 125 gallons per minute, but they're limited length, about 200 feet we have on them. Most engines will have anywhere between 200 to 300 feet. Anything more than that, you start getting diminishing results because of the amount of pressure you got to pump through it. And then you have the big 2.5-inch hoses. And the large 2.5-inch hoses have either fog nozzles or smoothbore nozzles. Either you're atomizing the water in a spray or you're shooting a laminar flow of water straight in. That hose right there can flow up to 250 gallons per minute, and that is the type of hose you want to be using. Big fire means big water. The other alternative we have on our trucks, and we have it on the back of all our engines, are these. These are blitz nozzles. These are nozzles that are hooked to 3-inch lines. We can stick them on the ground, go interior or exterior, put them on the ground, and they can flow up to 500 gallons of water out of them. Huge amounts of spray. Great for protection, great for inundating a fire. And in the case of a car deck fire, what you'd want is those high volumes of water with deep penetration. So a blitz nozzle or those 2.5-inch nozzles with fog or smoothbore. And then one of the things you would have to do is provide water to the fire trucks. And we do that with this up here. This is our large diameter hose. This yellow hose up here you see, all that is large diameter, 1,000 feet of 5-inch hose. And we hook up to fire hydrants for that and flow to the engines. Now in the case of a shipboard fire, you have all the water in the world because you're surrounded by water. You're on the ocean. In this case, Newark Bay. Now, Newark Bay, not the best water in the world, but it is water. And this is why you want fireboats responding. I don't know what the hydrant situation is in the port of New York, New Jersey, but even if you have hydrants right there, hydrants can provide maybe 1,000, 2,000 gallons per minute with really good hydrant systems. But a fireboat like Firefighter 2 coming from Staten Island or the 343 boat coming from Manhattan, those boats can pump thousands of gallons per minute. And what makes those fireboats really important is not spraying water like you always see, but they have manifolds, they have hookups along each quarter of the vessel, the 2 up front, 2 in the back part of the vessel. And you can hook your engines into it, and what you would then do is be able to pump into the vessel. So on many buildings and structures you'll see these, what are called FDC. These are fire department connections. And this is where you hook in your fire truck to a building to supplement the interior either sprinkler system or the standpipe system. Those are those pipes that you'll see within stairwells, so that if you have a fire in a structure, you can bring your hoses with you, climb the stairwell, hook into that, and you're fighting through the piping system that's there. You don't really want to extend hoses long distances because you start losing pressure. Plus, it's a real problem to do it. You got to use your large diameter hoses to do it. If you can use the internal pumping system, that works great. Now, ships don't have an FDC. Instead, they have a shoreline hookup, an international coupling shoreline hookup, so that fire trucks can pump into the vessel, energize the fire pump system, so that if the ship loses power, you can still use the standing hydrants and manifolds on the ship to pump from the fire. The problem is you got to have the right connectors. On fire trucks, we have a standard thread we use on our fire trucks. So this thread allows us to hook our fire hoses directly into it. The problem they had on the Grande Costa is that the threads didn't match. So that when they brought their hoses in and they tried to hook into the threads, it wouldn't match. And that's why you need one of these, an adapter. These adapters allow you to hook in your hose from one side and match it with another one, so that you can just take your adapter, stick it on, and then hook your hose in. You don't need specialized hoses. All you need was a bag of these adapters. And these adapters should have been readily available either through the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, or the fire department should have spec'd this out ahead of time to have these on, because if you don't have these, if you can't use the shipboard firefighting system, then you get a plan on fighting that fire using your own hoses, and that's a whole different plan.
So it seems that this initial call came in about 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday night. And Newark basically responded with a structure fire response, basically a one alarm response. Now later on they dropped a second box alarm on this to add more responses to it, but they really didn't call for a lot of mutual aid until their firefighters got stuck on board. Now let's talk a little bit about that initial response. Now this incident took place up on the 10th deck, as this video shows you right here. And this the ship is laid out like a parking deck. And these decks are not like parking decks. They're really tight. There's not a lot of overhead. You have basically adjustable decks. You have movable decks. And what they do is they move these decks so that they can get as many vehicles in as they can. If you watch the initial part of that video, you'll see a lot of the vehicles up on the weather deck, 12th deck. Some of them were really damaged. They had windows missing. They were covered in plastic. So these are new and used cars. Now, initially, the initial fire suppression should be from the ship. Now, talking to someone who sails on a sister ship of this, they have fixed CO2 systems, carbon dioxide, where you can basically pull handles and flood compartments full of CO2, which is perfect, exactly what you want to do. The problem is during loading operations, the decks are open, so the hatches are open, so you're moving vehicles, and the ventilation is going. You've got to secure the hatches, you've got to secure ventilation, and you need to ensure there's nobody in the space before you flood it with CO2. And that becomes an issue because it sounds like they were never able to do that. There was issues with using the ventilation and trying to seal the decks, but they were never able to do that. At which point, when Newark Fire Department arrives on scene, hopefully they would have hooked into the ship's international connection on shore to give more pressure to the fire system. And then the intention would have been to fight off the ship's firefighting system. But what we know is that there was an initial response from the Port Authority of New York. And they started using ship's hoses to fight the fire. And these are where those 1-inch hoses come in, those trash lines I was talking about. 1-inch hoses are not going to give you the penetration and the extinguishment you need. You need to use your own hoses, but that's when Newark found out their hoses would not match. They would have carried up high-rise packs, they would have carried up portable hoses with them, and those hoses would not have matched. Now, also, take a look at this. Think about how high this is. The area you're entering on the ship is down around deck 3 or 4, and you got to get up to the 10th deck. So you're talking about climbing 7-8 stories at least. And when you fight a fire like this, you need to stage on the deck below. You want to be spraying water at that overhead because the deck above you is the deck where the fire is, and that's a steel deck. But again, these decks are packed with vehicles. Bumper to bumper, door to door. There's no room to maneuver in there. There are chains holding them in place. It is extremely tight environment to be working in. And supposedly while they were working in this environment, vehicles shifted. There was explosions that could be coming from batteries. Even though they said there were no EVs, there could have been hybrids on board. There could be material in some of these used vehicles. There could be a lot of gasoline in some of the vehicles that wasn't properly drained. And so anyway, you start getting fires and explosions on the deck, and you start getting more and more fire. And again, one of the big problems here is Newark got themselves into an environment that they didn't need to be in. The crew evacuated, the stevedores evacuated. All you're talking about here is saving material, used and new cars. In which point they should have been setting up those water monitors, being able to hit the fire decks from the periphery and really trying to control the spread of this fire until reinforcements came, until mutual aid came. Again, until you can get those fireboats there, provide a lot of fire suppression, until you can get companies that are trained in how to do this, because it's clear if you can't use the ship's firefighting system, you've got to rig hoses. You've got to run hoses up ladderways. And that's a lot of manpower. It's a lot of hoses. It's a lot of water you're going to need. And that really requires a joint operation. And this is the issue with marine firefighting. If you look at the airports, at the airports, the FAA mandates that airports have fire units, and that is because they need those units to make the initial attack on planes to get people off. That's why they mandate it. That's what they say. Well, in many ways, you need that on ships. If you do not have a initial response that can get in there quickly and try to get the knockdown, which is what Newark tried to do, then this fire can get out of hand. And you have the situation you have today where this is coming on to Sunday and the fire is still burning on the ship. And that's the situation you get, because once the fire gets away from you, it is very difficult to get back. Again, I want to express my sincerest condolences to the Newark Fire Department on the loss of 2 firefighters. It is a tragedy of epic proportions. And once again, I ask everybody to extend their sympathy, their support to those families, to the Newark Fire Department. And one of the reasons I do this video, I did my last video, and I'm going to do another one talking about some past ship fires we should have learned from, is so that we can prevent this from happening again. I am absolutely trying to prevent another firefighter from dying on board a ship, and that is my goal. Please reach out. Help the Fallen Firefighter Foundation, which supports all fallen firefighters across the United States, and be thinking about the 2 firefighters who lost their lives in Newark. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.